In some of the other videos that we have made on this channel, we talked about police interrogation techniques. One such technique is the use of false evidence ploys. With this technique, what we do is we confront the suspect with essentially made-up evidence against them. We would say, we have a videotape of you entering the building, or we have a witness who has made a statement saying that he saw you entering the building of the victim on the day of the murder. We have ample evidence against you. Denial is futile. You better confess. Well, today let's review an interesting 2018 research paper which examined how the use of false evidence ploys during police interrogation might influence jurors, juries, and judges. Let's take a look. In the introductory and theoretical section of the paper, the authors talked about high-profile miscarriages of justice, issues related to the deceptive and sometimes coercive nature of police interrogations, but more specifically, the authors focused on the use of false evidence ploys. False evidence ploys are used during police interrogations to elicit admissions of guilt and/or confessions. False evidence ploys can come in different forms. Basically, all the classifications of real evidence also apply to false evidence. False evidence ploys could be material or physical. We found your watch at the scene of the crime. Or they can be testimonial. We have witness testimonies which place you at the scene of the crime. Or they could be scientific and/or forensic. We found your fingerprints, your blood, your DNA, etc. Essentially, depending on the specifics of the case and the interrogation, depending on the creativity of the police officers, false evidence ploys could be materialistic or physical, testimonial, forensic, direct or indirect, class or individual. It simply depends on what we make it up to be. But regardless what classifications of false evidence the officers come up with, the objective is clear and straightforward: to elicit incriminating statements, admissions of guilt, and/or confessions. In this particular paper that we're reviewing today, the researchers wanted to see how potential jurors, juries, and judges would react to the use of false evidence ploys by the police during interrogations. This paper includes two studies. In the first study, the researchers engaged over 600 university students as participants, playing the role of jurors in juries. And in the second study, the researchers engaged the participation of 129 sitting judges to join the study. Very briefly, this is how the methodological approach worked. Participants were provided with trial summary and the accompanying interrogation transcript of the interrogation of that suspect. There are 4 different conditions based on 2 criteria or manipulations. The researchers manipulated the existence of a false evidence ploy in the interrogation. In some of the conditions, the police officers did not use any false evidence ploys. The interrogators simply interrogated the suspect persistently until he confessed. In other conditions, the police did use a false evidence ploy against the suspect, saying there is witness testimony against him. The suspect then confessed after being confronted with this false evidence ploy. The other manipulation is the existence of expert testimony. In some of the conditions, a credentialed expert stated that false confessions can occur as a result of the use of false evidence ploys during police interrogations, and discussed different kinds of false evidence ploys. In other conditions, the expert would only talk about police interrogation techniques in general without explicitly discussing false evidence ploys. So taken together, there are 4 different conditions. Condition 1, false evidence ploys absent. There is no false evidence ploy used. Condition 2, false evidence ploy present. Police did use a false evidence ploy during the interrogation against the suspect. Condition 3, expert absent. There is no expert testimony on false evidence ploys potentially resulting in false confessions. And condition 4, expert present. There is expert testimony specifically regarding false evidence ploys and false confessions. Across the 4 different conditions, the researchers measured a bunch of outcome variables: jurors' perception of deception of the interrogation process, perception of coercion during the interrogation process, guilt ratings, verdicts, and sentencing recommendations. Furthermore, these variables were measured pre-deliberation and post-deliberation. The researchers also looked at the potential differences between individual jurors' perception and the decision reached by the jury, which had to be based on consensus. The researchers also presented findings concerning hung juries or juries that were not able to reach consensus in the allocated time for deliberation. Moreover, the researchers basically repeated the same process, more or less, on 129 sitting evaluating judges to see how the use of false evidence ploys and the presence of expert testimony would impact decision-making of judges. So methodologically, this is actually quite a complex paper. Essentially, there are two studies, one on jurors and juries, the other on judges. So if you are still with me at this point, let us now take a look at their findings. Across the 4 different conditions, jurors perceive the interrogation as deceptive and coercive even in conditions where the false evidence ploy was not used. But jurors in the false evidence ploy present conditions did view the interrogation as more deceptive and more coercive than in conditions where false evidence ploy was absent. In other words, police using false evidence ploys would indeed lead jurors to perceive the interrogation itself as more deceptive and more coercive. But that did not influence the verdicts of the individual jurors or deliberating juries. Isn't that interesting and somewhat surprising? The use of false evidence ploys would lead jurors to perceive the interrogation as more deceptive and more coercive, but they would still choose to convict. And we're going to come back to talk about why that is in just a minute. Now, the presence of an expert testimony, however, did affect jurors' perceptions as well as trial decisions. The presence of expert testimony provided sufficient information to affect individual jurors' verdicts and guilt ratings, and it led to a general skepticism effect. That is, when jurors are given expert testimony regarding the use of false evidence ploys, they develop a sense of skepticism regarding the validity of the interrogation process. And now, let's take a look at the findings from the judge sample. Judges who read an interrogation transcript, including the false evidence ploy, rated the interrogation as more deceptive, but unlike the first sample, judges only perceived the deceptive interrogation as slightly more coercive. This is probably because, as the authors indicated in this paper, judges' perceptions of the interrogation reflected their legal expertise and were likely based on legal precedents. Put differently, judges know that the use of false evidence ploys, although deceptive, is legally permissible, so they do not necessarily see it as highly coercive. Among the sampled judges, expert testimony did induce a skepticism effect on their verdicts and guilt ratings. The authors noted, however, that the p-values for this skepticism effect only approached statistical significance, so strictly it is not statistically significant. So, taken together, this paper showed that although potential jurors recognized the deception inherent in false evidence ploys, this perceived deception did not affect their decision to convict. What did reduce jurors and deliberating juries' likelihood of conviction was the presence of testimonies given by credentialed experts concerning false evidence ploys and false confessions. Why is this? Well, this is because, as this paper says, it is unlikely that average jurors would have accurate and in-depth knowledge about police interrogations. In fact, here I dare to say, if you have watched all of our videos on this channel regarding police interrogation techniques, if you have watched actual police interrogation tapings here on YouTube and commentaries and analyses on them, you know what? You probably know more about police interrogation than an average juror would. Moreover, this paper says it is also unlikely that any jurors would believe that a defendant would falsely confess to a crime that they did not commit in the absence of physical coercion and mental illnesses. But in fact, we know that false confessions are not uncommon, given the effectiveness of the numerous police interrogation techniques that officers use. This paper is published open access, which means the full text of this paper is available on the internet. Download it, give it a quick read, it's an interesting one. What do you think about the use of false evidence ploys during police interrogations? Should that be allowed in your opinion? Do you think the risks outweigh the benefits or the other way around? Have you ever been interrogated by the police? If so, tell us about it. As always, leave your thoughts, comments down below. Thanks for watching this Rainyways random video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.